And we're off. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Technology for Good show. This is episode 81. I'm Tom Raftery from RedMonk, and with me today I have co-hosting Scott. Scott, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Scott Brooks, Canadian, co-founder of a company called TimeHero.com. Known Tom for quite a few years, and I was just saying before we started, the first time we actually talked on video was actually the day Skype video launched. So that's taking us back to 2006, I think.
Wow, holy crap, that's a long time. Jeez.
It is. It's come a long way. It wasn't certainly wasn't this quality back then, but yeah, it has come a long way. So thank you very much for having me. I'm glad to be here, and hopefully I can keep pace.
I'm sure you can, no problem at all. And thanks for jumping in at short notice. Just for a quick clarifier, Scott, what is Time Hero?
So what we realize is that there's a big problem between the stuff you have to do and the time that you have to do it. And we realize that, like, without having a person helping you do that and plan the actual work that you have to do, that we needed to come up with something that kind of solved that problem. So Time Hero is, in a nutshell, artificial intelligence for your calendar, and not just for the events, but the actual work that you have to get done. Can
you give me an example?
Yeah, so there's, anytime someone does something that's repetitive, let's say, we know, well, I'm going to pick on photographers. I'm just going to pick photographers. So a photographer will do the same thing over and over again. It's a workflow. So what we realize is that actually takes a lot of time to schedule all that work and know what you're supposed to be doing. So what we allow them to do is automatically schedule everything that they have to do for a client across, a whole bunch of clients or a very long time. So bringing that intelligence into your calendar and then allowing, like, when an event comes in, it'll push stuff out of the way, and it's quite magical. And it's like having a person scheduling yourself, but
And if I want to try it out?
We are going to be going to a, sorry, I'm just going to get called there.
No worries.
All these people calling to see me on that. So what we're at right now is we actually have it out in private beta with a bunch of different types of organizations. So some small, some large, some teams within large companies, individuals. We're going to be going out to a larger beta group in February, and then a wide open, open for business in March.
Awesome. So we'll keep an eye out for it. Thanks for that. So we'll head into the stories, and we discussed on the show last week the climate conference in Paris, and it hadn't yet been signed. And so we've seen, as a result of the signature on Saturday, a lot of stories emerge from that. So we have a lot of climate-based stories today, and we'll try and rip through as many of them as we can in as quick time as possible, because I'm cognizant of people's time. And so I'm just going to go through a couple of them very quickly. The first one we saw, and we've talked about this before, so it's no surprise to regular watchers of the show, 2015 scorcher in relation to all other years on record. So, I mean, we've talked about this before, no big surprise there. There's an interesting graph here from the NOAA, the National Centers for Environmental Information. You can see on this chart here, the 6 warmest years on record to date are these colored lines going from January to December of their respective years, and they're like 98, 2009, 2005, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The black line at the top is this year. So you can see the difference between this year and the 6 previous hottest years on record. It's pretty stark. This has been a blowout year in terms of heat. And if you think that's bad, and hopefully you do, but if you think that's bad, the UK Met Office has said that 2016 is set to be the hottest year on record globally, blowing out the record for 2015. And they've said that there's like a 5% chance that 2016 will be only equal to 2015. So there's a 95% chance or greater that 2016 will be the hottest year on record. So it's, in terms of climate news, there's a lot of bad news there. There's a lot of other stories, bad news as well, that I figured we had enough bad news. So I wanted to get into some of the good news. And the best news that came out this week was on Saturday the signing of the Paris climate deal, and we had 195 countries sign this agreement to say that we would try and limit global warming to 2 degrees centigrade and 1.5, if at all possible. Every effort we made to try and limit it to 1.5. Was it the best deal that could have been signed? Probably not. Could we have done better? Probably yes. But let's face it, when you have 195 countries there getting any signature on any piece of paper at all is an enormous achievement. And frankly, this agreement is only going to be, I think, a stepping stone, because it has built into it a 5-year review process, which will say, and 12-month reporting obligations as well on countries. So countries have to report their emissions every 12 months, and there'll be a 5-year review process on countries' emissions. So not the best deal that could have been signed, you know, if you want to be fundamentalist about it. But in fairness, if you want to be practical about it, when you have countries like Russia, Venezuela, and Saudi Arabia there, who are oil-producing countries, who are never going to sign anything, you know, anything anywhere near as ambitious as a lot of people had hoped for, getting this much was pretty phenomenal, I have to say.
Well, you know what? It was even, you know, of course, I don't know if your viewers may or may not know, we had a change in government in Canada. And, you know, I mean, I think what you're seeing from Canada on the global scale, on this global stage right now, is really how the people have felt. You know, I mean, there was you know, we're really happy about Canada's participation. And, you know, we have a lot of oil here too, you know, and I mean, we're one of those countries, so.
And it wasn't just the Canadian government, but also the government in Alberta changed. So you had regime change in 2 places. And both of those places, both the Alberta government and the Canadian national government, were pro-fossil fuel before the change. And the change has been pro-environment. You've had a government come in Alberta who are putting in a carbon tax, if I remember correctly. And you've had Justin Trudeau come in as the Prime Minister of Canada, and he's put in place a climate change minister, which is and a Minister of Science, which is, you know, considering the previous government, Harper's government, and their war on science, this has been an incredibly positive change.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, we're seeing that here. I mean, and I think we're happy. I mean, as a Canadian and as a global citizen, I'm really happy. I mean, I think we, you know, by doing the right thing, we like to do the right thing. I think that's kind of, you know, what we're known for. And I think that us not doing the right thing and not leading didn't put us in the best light. So I'm really happy with you know, kind of how it's going. And I think there's a fundamental change and a real sense of change here in Canada. So.
Yeah, you can now be proud to be Canadian once more.
Well, I mean, it's I certainly wear that the Canadian flag with pride, and you're right. I certainly wear it a little bit prouder today. So
it was fantastic to see those images of Trudeau in the airport welcoming the Syrian refugees.
Well, I think he's, you know, I mean, and you know, as soon as he won, he was on the Monday morning or whenever it was after, he was in the Montreal transit station, like kind of just shaking hands with people. And I think that's you know, whether or not he's going to make a great prime minister, that still remains to be seen. I think what he's done is he's kind of brought people together, and, you know, people that were looking for change. And I think it came from both sides of it. I think people are a little bit tired of having, you know, we went from having a whole bunch of, you know, our the protected lakes in Canada, and that's, you know, I live in a city with 330 lakes within the city, so protecting lakes is really important. But you know, under the Harper government, they went to, instead of like 5,000 protected lakes, it's down to 20 or 50 or something like that. So there's, you know, and they did it through the bureaucracy. So I think you know, you're going to see that change. And I mean, we have to. So
yeah, and I'm curious because I don't know much about Trudeau. I mean, I know he's the son of the famous Premier Trudeau as well. But how much of the image he's putting out is real, and how much is PR?
I have no idea. That's a pretty, no, I think that, you know, when you're looking at government in Canada, it's typically, or it's only ever been the Liberals or the Conservatives. I mean, we're kind of a two-party system. It's, kind of the same flavors, but just different shades of it. And they know how to run government. So it's not like he's coming in, like he has a party beneath him and a structure that has run government before very successfully and unsuccessfully and, across the board. So I think that, he's got a system there that, if he's new or he has, I think he'll do okay. But I mean, it remains to be seen how we're still in the honeymoon phase right now. So let's go a little bit further.
Have you ever seen the English comedy series Yes Minister, Yes Prime Minister?
I have. Yes, I know but yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it remains. You're seeing there's just been a lot of changes in a lot of governments, and we have I think our structure is similar to the British style of government, where you don't elect the prime minister, you elect the party, and so it's not like you're electing a president. So I mean, that's a little bit different about how we elect people here. So they voted for the party and they voted Harper out. That was a pretty clear statement. Yeah.
It's going to be fascinating to watch, I gotta say.
Yeah.
We'll move on because there's a lot of stories to get through and some very good ones there, I think. I saw that there's a couple related to this thing, the investment tax credit extension. And this was a rider on a bill that was passed in the US this week. And basically, the bill was around freeing up oil exports from the US. But the rider was interesting because it extended this tax credit for solar and for wind. And basically, there's been several reports about this, how because this has been passed, to put a 5-year extension on it, it looks like it's going to increase solar installations 54% between now and 2020. And as I say, there's a couple of reports on that. There's one out of Bloomberg New Energy Finance, which talks about it in some detail. And there's also this one from, no, I've lost it. Was it this one? Yes, here we are. This one is on the GTM site, the Green Tech Media site, and you can see the figures here for photovoltaic installations with and without the extension. So without the extension, on the left, you can see 2016, 2018, 2020, the figures are low enough here on the right-hand side of the left-hand chart, whereas on the right-hand chart, with the extension which has been passed, you can see the massive increase in utility, non-residential and residential solar. And the same carries for wind, because wind has received an extension as well, a 5-year extension. So while people were thinking of ramping back down on their solar and wind investments, now that this extension has been put out another 5 years, we'll see wind and solar for the next 5 years growing far more than they would otherwise have done. On the back of that, we see companies like Sungevity closing this year's largest private financing round in solar, and they got, where was it, 650 million to support the company's US and international business. So the ITC extension has been hugely successful, I think, or it will be hugely successful, I think, in increasing the monies going into solar and wind in the US in the next 5 years. And that's hugely important because while the amount of solar and wind in the US at the moment is quite small, and we're talking single-digit numbers in terms of percentage generation, it wouldn't have grown anything like it's now going to grow. And this is obviously hugely important because the US is such a big market and generates so much emissions.
I did, you know what, I talked to, so I'm on the technology side, so I get to talk to some of these guys that are doing this stuff, and they're just talking about how quickly they didn't even expect the cost for solar to come down so quickly, and the where it's on par with everything else now, and you know, and it's pretty exciting. I mean, I really love listening to Elon Musk talking about the sun, and you know, so it makes total sense.
Oh yeah, I mean and in fact we've talked about it on the show before. There's this thing called the Swanson effect, which is like Moore's law for solar, and it says that the price of solar drops 20% for every doubling of installed capacity. And and this has held true for the last 30 years. And at one point, about 2008, 2009, that kind of ballpark, it hit an inflection point where it came to a price where suddenly it became very attractive for people to install it. And of course, then you hit this lovely virtuous circle where as more and more people installed solar, then the installed capacity kept doubling. And as it kept doubling, the price kept dropping 20% year on year on year. So the price for solar, depending on the geo, because as you go further south, it becomes more attractive. But we saw a price this year in, I want to say Nevada, obviously a sunny clime, of about 3 cents per kilowatt hour, which is just phenomenal. I mean, that beats gas in most places. So, and because it keeps being rolled out and because we keep seeing advances in the technology, it gets cheaper all the time. And there's no end in sight to that, which is, mind blowing, because we're going to get to a point where solar is, just why would you do anything else? Because it's so cheap.
I'm waiting for the point. So, I mean, the way we do houses here in Canada, typically you have an asphalt shingle roof, and I'm hoping, because they have a limited lifespan, I'm hoping when I have to go change that, I'm going to be able to put something that is solar, or it just makes sense. I'm waiting for these companies to go, okay, now it's cheap enough and durable enough and lasts long enough that we can do it. And being in a northern climate where it's a little bit cooler, the guys that have solar farms here are actually liking the cool climate because it keeps the panels cooler. Obviously, we don't get as much sun, but the longevity of the panels. So
nice, yeah. The one thing you'd have to do is clean the snow off it.
Yeah, yeah. Not this year. I was just saying we were talking before the show started, and usually we have a lot of snow and it's really cold. And I have been bring coat, and we're just getting a light dusting of snow now. So this is a little bit, when we're talking about the climate, I mean, I'm seeing it here. And, in the last 2 years when everyone was talking about that polar vortex, I was right in the middle of that polar vortex. So, yeah, you're right. There's snow here.
Not at the moment, but there often is. Yeah, no, that's not something we have to worry about here in Seville. I think the last time it snowed was 2010 or 2011 in January, one Sunday afternoon, and I had a phone call from a guy I know here saying, "Tom, it's snowing." I said, "What do you mean it's snowing?" He said, "Look out the window." I looked out the window; it had already stopped. So I went to YouTube and I looked up snow in Seville, and sure enough, there was a picture or a video that my neighbor had shot of the snow falling about half an hour earlier, and literally you had 5 or 6 snowflakes falling and melting before they hit the ground. So that's the kind of snow we get here. And before that, the previous time it snowed was in the 50s.
Well, that excitement that you get for the snow in Seville is kind of the opposite for my kids, where they're like, "What do you mean there's going to be no snow for Christmas?" I mean, it's we always have snow for Christmas, so this will be one of the green Christmases. So,
wow. Next, we'll keep going because there's a lot of stuff to get through, and I saw this one, and I gotta say, every time I see this guy Ernest Moniz, his haircut freaks me out. It's just wild. But he's the Secretary of Energy in the U.S., the U.S. Energy Secretary, Ernest Moniz, or Moniz. I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce his surname, but the Obama administration announced a huge energy efficiency rule, and it has to do with furnaces and it has to do with air conditioning. And basically what it is it's new standards around them, and they reckon it'll translate into $167 billion in saved costs for businesses over the life of the standard, and 885 million tons fewer carbon dioxide emissions. What they don't say in the article is how long the life of the standard is, but the standard apparently over its lifetime will save that much money and that many tons of CO2 emitted. So it's a pretty impressive standard. They say as well further down.
Do you really believe those? Do you believe those numbers though? Like, Where do they get? How are they calculating those? I mean, and that's just more of a kind of a question. Is like those are great numbers, and I love it. You know, I see it all the time in my industry where people go, "Well, this market is a $10 billion market," and I guess so. But you know, if you and I always wonder when I see those numbers, and you know, how does that translate? Because really, the problem is how does that translate down to an individual business? And is it worth it for that individual business? Because when you aggregate all those numbers, it makes it look really great and shiny. But when you actually look at it on a per business level, are they going to save, you know, by my changing all the lights in my house to LED, I didn't save, I saved a couple of dollars. You know, I know, you know, so is it, you know, that's, I always wonder.
No, it's a very valid point, in fairness, Scott. What I would say is that when I see those numbers put out there by industry, like the $10 billion market, I always kind of go, really? Where are you getting that number from? And it'll always turn out to be some flaky analyst firm like Gartner or IDC. Whereas when public sector announce it, typically it's backed up by research by public sector itself. And usually the numbers quoted by public sector are a little more conservative than those coming from the likes of the analyst firms. And the ones from the analyst firms are often cherry-picked and they're often paid for, whereas the numbers from public sector are not. So I find them a little more trustworthy. Having said that, it's not an easy number ever to calculate because, as you rightly say, if you switch out your halogen lights for LEDs or whatever, you know, who knows how much you would have turned them on or off, and you're looking at mean usage of them over the previous 5 years versus now LEDs, and it's always a bit of a, you know, stick a finger in the air and pick a number kind of exercise. Now they do try and back it up with research, but you can never stand over them hand and heart and say these are the exact numbers because a lot of it is speculative.
Fair enough. Yeah. That's interesting. I always add that. I mean, that puts it as certainly an interesting perspective on how to interpret them. So thank you.
Yeah, no worries. We'll keep going. So there's this story from the Washington Post talking as well. I mean, I talked about how solar and wind are getting a massive lift from that legislation. But there's also a huge lift as well for storage, and this is a story that, you know, we've talked about before on this show, week in, week out, how the advances in storage are proceeding. And now there's this company called AES. They're a large energy company in Virginia, and they've announced a huge deal in the battery space. And basically, they're gaining access to 1 gigawatt hour worth of lithium ion batteries from LG Chem, the Seoul-based company. And they're a gigawatt hour. I mean, how do you put this in context? So the best way, I guess, to put that in context is to say that in 2013, the amount of storage that was rolled out globally was around 30 gigawatt hours globally. So this one deal is 1/30th of the global storage for the year 2013. So it's a huge deal for one company to be doing. And it just talks to the fact that storage is an industry that is growing huge time. The price, as a consequence of this, the price of batteries is going to continue to decrease as it has been doing. The density of storage of batteries is going to continue to increase as it has been doing. And again, like the Moore's Law and like the Swanson effect, we're going to see batteries becoming more energy dense and cheaper as time goes by, which will have massive effects for everything from our mobile devices to our cars. And we're seeing it every year. If you look at things like cars like the Nissan Leaf, you see that every year the latest model of the Nissan Leaf, its batteries go that much further. And the same will happen with the Teslas as they roll them out year on year. And it means that as we move everything to be more electrified, and as we move our electricity grid to renewables, we will massively decrease our carbon footprint globally. That's the plan anyway.
Well, that's what I really liked about that Tesla battery pack for the home. I mean, I just like the fact that I'd be able to store it and use it when I need it. I need my lights at night, and those things are. I think you're going to see more companies taking advantage of that and building these things that for the home. Like, I think it's. I'm so excited to see this technology come down to the home level, and to me, as a and that's why I saw that first one with Tesla battery was that first, like, wow, I can maybe cut myself off from the grid.
Yeah.
You know, or not, you know, have it there but not need it all the time. I'd love that. I think that'd be great.
I think what will happen is, so the Tesla Powerwall batteries are rated at 7 kilowatt hours and 10 kilowatt hours. And if you buy a Tesla car, the Tesla car batteries are 10 times that. They're about 70 to 100 kilowatt hours, 70 to 95, in fact. So I think if you have a car, you probably won't need the Powerwall because you'll be able to use the car instead of the Powerwall.
Oh, interesting.
And what you should be able to do is you should be able to do a bit of energy arbitrage using your car and or your batteries. So you suck in energy when power is cheap, and then you sell it on when power is expensive, as the price changes per day, which is something at the moment which isn't exposed to consumer, but it should be and will be as we start to get real-time pricing rolled out using smart grid technologies.
Yeah, we're starting to see that here in Ontario. I mean, we generate a lot of energy, but you do see a day and a night price and different. That's a reality here. So anything that can let me buy it cheap and use it, at the most appropriate time, or store it for my solar array or my whatever, just let me store it easily and safely.
And the thing is that there's lots of other storage technologies that people are unaware of. So, for example, it doesn't just have to be batteries, but if you have an electric immersion system for heating your water, you can suck in energy during night when energy is cheap and heat that water and then let it drift during the day, because it's probably your water tank is probably heavily lagged. So you don't care when you actually heat the water, as long as when you turn the hot tap on, there's hot water coming out of it. So, when energy is cheap, you suck it in, you heat the water, and similarly with cooling. So there's such a thing as ice bank air conditioning. So you create ice and you use it to chill your air for air conditioning during the day. Again, you make the ice when the energy is cheap. Similarly with fridges, freezers, those kind of things, you can chill them a little extra and let the temperature drift during the day. So what you want to try and do is stimulate demand at night when energy is cheaper and greener, and then let it drift during the day when it's not.
Yeah, we see a lot of. I get to see. I've seen a lot of those things here. A lot of people I said live on lakes here, so using a geothermal system to degree rob from the lake, for example, by putting a long coil, and you see these things, and you're like, well, how does that work? But it works, and these guys spend So what we're starting to see in those things, those prices are coming down. It's less, less expensive to get involved in that. So as you see more of these people doing these things, I love it. I wish I just wanted to be on a lake, right?
No, I totally get it. And we've had a couple of comments on Twitter on the Tech for Good hashtag where Susan Cohane is saying that she's talking about the fact that there's a town in the US where people are worried about putting out solar. In fact, it was in North Carolina, if memory serves me correctly.
But has that been confirmed through Snopes? I want to check that one.
It sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? They actually said, and there was a science teacher involved in it, and I think it was one of the science teachers who said that the solar panels would suck up the energy from the sun, and it would affect plant growth and ridiculous stuff like that. As you say, it sounds way too good to be true. I suspect that it was a town hall meeting where somebody made some inane comment and a journalist picked up on it and blew it out of all proportion. Because I don't think a whole town could be that silly. I really don't. I've got some bit of respect for people's intelligence, and I don't believe a whole town could be that silly.
It just sounds so crazy that, but yeah. If that's what's happening, I love it. It's funny and scary at the same time.
It is. We talked about solar as well, and the fact that the price is coming down. I saw this story coming out reported in The Guardian coming out of Australia, talking about this thing called perovskite. I don't know, again, pronunciation, I'm just going to pretend I know, and I'm going to say it's perovskite. It's a new solar technology which makes solar panels, or which will make solar panels, I say, cheaper and more efficient. Basically, the layer of solar that you roll out with perovskite is half a micron thick, as opposed to the typical 70 microns, which means it's obviously a much thinner layer, and they're saying it could be kind of sprayed onto surfaces, and that it's as efficient as typical solar panels. It's around 20% at the moment, and they reckon that they'll be able to boost it far higher than that. It's very early stage now, but it's looking very promising apparently, and it's, you know, according to this article, it holds a lot of promise for A, reducing the price, B, increasing the efficiency, and C, making solar far more ubiquitous.
Well, I think at one point I read something about the use of graphene in solar panels is something that people are experimenting with. So I mean, there's a whole bunch of different things that people are working on. It's exciting. It's really exciting, because one of these things will win and one will,
yeah.
you know.
Yeah, no, that's it. I mean, this space, the solar space and the storage space, the two of those, if you're keeping an eye on those at the moment, there's news reports and there's updates and press releases coming out daily with new things. And as you say, not all of them will make it to commercialization, but some of them will. And that's why the price is going to keep going down for both solar and for storage. It's because with the constant demand for more of each, you're getting economies of scale, and you're getting money being poured into research, and you're seeing things like the Breakthrough Coalition, which was announced last week, lots and lots of money being thrown this direction. So it's just going to keep getting better and better and better, which is phenomenal.
Well, and if you looked at that story you talked about earlier with the largest funding ever, if you looked at who the major funding partner was GE Ventures. So yeah, these large companies aren't losing the fact that you know, something is certainly happening here. So I mean, if they're any good indication, you know, GE is a pretty good indication of where the market could be heading.
Exactly. I mean, you don't see GE, you know, they're not exactly tree huggers. They're not doing it to save the environment. If it happens to save the environment as well, hey, kudos to them. But you know, no, they're very much, you know, very, very, very strongly capitalistic and chasing the money.
It's the fear of missing out, and that's what I think. They don't want to get beat by some guy who created a search engine and then beat them at their own game. So I mean, I think that's why you want to. They're going to, you know, and which is good. It's funding the innovation. It's putting some of that big, you know, big money to use. So it's good to see.
Yeah, totally. And I saw this story as well coming out from San Diego, and you know, it's lovely to see. And you got to hope it's going to be one of many similar stories where San Diego have. It's not just a vow. It's not a vow. The headline is wrong. They passed an ordinance. They've written this into law in the city. So it's not an aim, it's an actual ordinance. San Diego is going to move entirely to renewable energy in 20 years. And you know, that is just absolutely phenomenal. They've said by 2035 they'll be getting their energy 100% from renewables. And this kind of speaks to the rise of cities in the political sphere, because oftentimes, and particularly in the US, you see government being kind of hobbled by Congress or by squabbles and by the bipartisan nature of politics there, whereas cities seem to just get on with it. And even San Diego's mayor is a Republican mayor, and still they passed this ordinance with his backing. You know, so it's fantastic to see. It's really upbeat. It's one of these stories that kind of restores your faith in local politics.
I think what I like, you know, and I think it comes down to a pretty basic thing, and they look at the cost of fuel and running all the vehicles. Like if you just look at the cost of fuel for running all the vehicles that they have to run and all the, you know, powering all the buildings that they have to run, I mean, that's just money that they're throwing away. Yep. And it's not going into anything that is of value to the citizens. It's just a cost, kind of that. If you can remove that cost of doing business, I mean,
And the thing is, if you are having to build solar plants and wind turbines, you're having to build them. So you're having to employ people to do it. So suddenly you're employing people, you're getting income tax, they go out having earned money and they go out and buy things. So you're getting sales tax. They're putting kids into school. They're moving new people into the city. So you're generating an economy there, and the money that you're spending to buy the power isn't going to the likes of Saudi Arabia and places like that. It's staying within your local economy. So it's a win-win-win. And then, of course, you've got the whole thing that it's renewable energy. It's not causing pollution. So the health of your citizens increases because you're not burning oil or burning coal or any of those ridiculous kinds of power generation things.
Yeah, I think I mean, hopefully we're going to see it, the end of the oil age. And I think that, there's going to be a lot of upset people, and there's going to be people in Alberta when the end of the oil age comes. And, so it's coming, and you love to see places like San Diego taking a lead like that, and I think that's what it takes. It takes a couple of cities to do this, and then become that blueprint for how to do it, and how to make that change, because that change is hard, and but that's again an exportable knowledge. And become experts in that. So
absolutely. The Germans did it. The Germans rolled out residential solar by offering a feed-in tariff of 47 cents per kilowatt hour to anyone who produced it at home. And of course, there was a huge upsurge of people putting solar panels on the roof, and the Germans suddenly became the leader in solar in Europe. And Germany's not that warm a place when you consider, in Europe, you've got places like Greece and Italy and here in Spain. And yet they leapfrogged everyone just by putting a simple tariff or a feed-in tariff in place. It was phenomenal. So yeah, and then the German companies became the leaders, and as you say, they started exporting their knowledge. So you're absolutely right. It's a win-win all around. And speaking of Germany, I saw this story coming out of the Max Planck Institute in Germany, where they've come up with a new way of generating power using nuclear fusion technology. Now, this is very much still laboratory-based, and they've done it with helium in their reactor, and they've managed to produce plasma for the first time for, admittedly, 1/10 of a second, but it's the first time it's been done. And they want to go and they want to do it from hydrogen instead of helium, and they obviously want to do it for more than 1/10 of a second. But they did it. This is a breakthrough in fusion which hasn't been done before, and it speaks to the possibility of having fusion power. Now, anytime we hear a breakthrough in fusion, it's always 10 years from commercialization. So you got to take these things with a large bucket of salt. But it is another breakthrough on the road to nuclear fusion if we ever get there.
But I've seen a lot of these things coming, they seem to be, I don't know if there's been a shift, and I'm not familiar with all the research that's going on, but there's been a few things that have come out recently where guys have been getting closer to this type of, they're not the only group working on this. And
True.
So it's really, I mean, yeah, you're right. I mean, we could not be having this whole conversation about a lot of these technologies, could make a lot of things obsolete really quick.
I mean, the nuclear power has a place, definitely, as in fission. Nuclear fission power has a place in the mix because it is low carbon. The difficulty is with nuclear fission, you've got the waste issue, and you've got decommissioning issues, and you've got issues as well around the potential for another Fukushima or Chernobyl or whatever. So there are risks there. They're small, but they're there. And consequently, the cost and the time scale of rolling out a nuclear power plant are enormous. So if you want to build a nuclear power plant, it's typically going to, a single reactor will typically produce about 1 gigawatt of power. And the building of that reactor is a 7 to 10 year project, and billions of dollars or euros or whatever you want to call it, whatever your currency of choice is. You're talking billions, tens of billions probably. The thing is, China is rolling out 70 gigawatts of solar in the next 2 years.
Yeah.
So when you, and 110 gigawatts of wind, when you see those numbers, you kind of go, holy crap, you know, the renewables scale enormously and they don't have any of the risks. And because they don't have the risks, that means they can scale. Whereas nuclear, while it has a place in the mix, its place in the final mix is going to be very, very small unless they get fusion right.
I always look at it from a science, like when I envision us going to the moon or something like that, I'm like, how are you going to get power? You know, so I always have these like, you know, crazy science fiction kind of dreams of fusion power. And I mean, maybe they're fueled of nothing more than just going, that's really cool. And they did it, you know, and, you know, I don't know how you're going to use it, but it's really cool that you did it.
Yeah. Time will tell, I guess.
Yeah.
But the thing is, we're hopefully we'll have options, which will be great. So if they start to get it right, I mean, it's in that one in the Max Planck Institute in Germany. I mean, they were doing it at temperatures of minus 270 C, you know, down around absolute zero. You know, trying to do that at anything other than a massive scale is going to be very difficult. So it's, you know, you're not going to get 25 megawatt fusion reactors anytime soon. It's going to be in the gigawatt range, you know, which has a place too, but you're talking massive costs.
There was other things too. Like I remember reading about the thorium-based reactor, and there's been a lot of, you know,
but
like
thorium is fission, not fusion.
Oh, it's fission. Correct. Sorry.
You know, now it's cleaner than the current fission ones, but you still have risks there that most other energy generation doesn't have. And the other thing about nuclear as well is that because it's a thermal generation source, it has an enormous water footprint, which solar and wind don't have. And, you know, for the likes of places like California, which are suffering an enormous 4-year drought now, the water footprint of any electrical generation is something that has to be taken into account. I mean, you're talking with nuclear reactors, with current technology, current fission reactors, you're talking they're using millions of gallons of water per day. And that's, you know, in a place where you're water stressed, that's an issue. That's a definite issue. So I don't know. There's no one answer, one size fits all. It depends entirely on where you are.
Yeah, we actually call, like when I refer to my electrical utility, I actually call it hydro.
Yeah.
Sudbury Hydro, you know, which is kind of funny that has actually taken root. Like, so if you're talking to someone in Ontario, it's hydro, and it's, you know, electricity from water. So I mean, we're pretty good at dams and such, so which are terrible on their own, but.
And there, I mean, it's Hydro 1 in Ontario, isn't it? And it's BC Hydro in British Columbia, and there's a few of them named like that. You're not unique in that. And there was one in Tasmania as well, whose name I've forgotten, but I spoke to a guy from there as well. And yeah, it's interesting. It's funny how that works. But we'll move on, and we'll move into transportation now, because there was a couple of interesting stories from there that I thought I should mention. And I mean, we've spoken about so far about how technology and research and development is reducing costs all the time for the likes of solar and storage. But it's not just there. I mean, we've had a lot of research and development in the last few years, thanks in large part, I got to say, to Google, to self-driving cars. And one of the devices that the self-driving cars use is this device on the roof of the car. It's called a LiDAR. It's a type of radar which uses lasers, hence LiDAR. And these are spinning lasers, but they cost, you know, in the order of $75,000 per LiDAR, which, you know, when a car costs $30,000, having this thing on the roof costing 75 is a bit of an issue. But because there's been a lot of research and development in this space, because the likes of Google and now Uber and Apple and others are looking into self-driving cars, the costs of LiDARs have started to come down enormously. And now you're starting to get them coming out at around the sub $500 LiDAR sensor range. So that kind of fall, that kind of massive fall in the cost of these things, I mean, it's not unique to LiDAR. But in this kind of situation, people weren't looking into LiDARs before because there wasn't a demand for them. But when you start to see that these are required for self-driving vehicles, and the market for that is millions and millions of devices globally, suddenly people start getting interested and sit up and take notice and go, oh, actually, there's a market there. Maybe we should look into making that cheaper and better. And boom, you go from $75,000 down to 500. And that's 500 today. That'll be 50 in a year's time.
Well, it's interesting that the LiDAR is actually used for a whole bunch of different things. We're a resource-based community in Sudbury, and so they use LiDAR at certain places to measure emissions. So you can actually look at something in the sky and see, the makeup of it based upon how stuff bounces off it. So there's to get those things down, that just brings a whole bunch of other technologies that will be able to use that, not just driving cars.
Yeah.
The other thing is, you don't have to worry about hitting a $75,000 thing off the top of your car as you drive into the garage. So. It's a little bit reassuring. So
no, it is, and because they'll come down to 50 and smaller, you won't have them on the roof. You'll have them on the four pillars of the car, so they'll be all around rather than one on the roof, and that way they'll cause less drag. And instead of going through 360 degrees per LiDAR, you'll have them go through maybe 120 degrees on each corner and overlap, and then a single computer in the center, just stitching them together and getting an idea for the car.
I'm really interested to see what's going to happen with autonomous cars. Because theoretically we'd only need one car. Like in my neighborhood, we'd only need one car amongst 2 or 3 families. Yeah. So this model that if I was the car companies, I'd be really afraid of Uber right now, because once they get their autonomous cars and they're working, guess what? If they figure that system out and let me share a car with someone else and book it as I need it, there's a lot less cars on the road.
And it's not just Uber, because as we saw this week, Google have announced that they're going to do it as well. They're spinning out a company into Alphabet who are going to do exactly that. And they've got the technology with their small little bubble cars that they have there, but they're pushing that forward, and they are going to take Uber on completely in this market. The difficulty they have is not technological, but it's regulatory, because during the week we saw laws passed in California to say that autonomous cars have to have a driver in them. And yeah, it's crazy, but that law will get overturned as well. It's a temporary setback. All these things are, but when you have the likes of Google and Uber and Apple also doing this, and not just them, but we saw as well another headline during the week saying that Ford are getting into this space, and of course they have to, because all the big manufacturers are going to have to start getting into this as well. We saw Volvo a few months back making an announcement about autonomous vehicles as well, and in the Volvo announcement, it was fascinating. What Volvo said was, if you are in one of our autonomous vehicles and it has a crash, we will take full liability for that crash. And this was the CEO of Volvo, and he said this without any reservation or without any, if it happens this way. There was none of that. It was, if one of our cars has an accident, we will assume liability for that accident. And this has got to have the insurance industry tearing their hair out, going, what do we do? Because what's going to happen is, if the car companies are assuming liability, then you as a driver are no longer going to need to have insurance. And the only time you would need insurance is if you were actually driving a car. And suddenly you become the most dangerous thing on the road if you're driving the car. So your insurance for driving a car is going to be quite high compared to, not owning and not driving a car, but just calling a car up and getting into one where there's no insurance cost at all.
Yeah, I can't wait. What I'm waiting for though is everyone's still making them look like cars. I'm really waiting for someone to make an autonomous car that looks more like my living room, and and it breaks that whole mold of what an autonomous car looks like, or makes it more like my office or something like that for travel. I'm excited. I love it. Like I said, I can't wait.
I have a daughter who's 17, but I have 2 boys who are 12 and 9. And I really suspect that by the time the two boys come to driving age, they won't need to get a driver's license. You know,
well, it's you know, just seeing this stuff with the lane assist in the Tesla and how that keeps you on the road. I mean, you know, I don't know what it's like there, but I mean, drinking and driving is an issue here. You know, and it probably is everywhere. And
yeah.
you know, perfect. Hey, drink as much as you want. Let your car drive you home. I mean,
Exactly.
it seems to make so much sense. For myself, I'm about 3 hours outside of Toronto, so I mean, that would let me get up in the morning, get in my car at 3 a.m, and be in Toronto at 6 o'clock, and still be sleeping. Like it opens up so many things.
Yeah. And on the way home, still be doing email as you're driving home.
Yeah, or sleeping.
Or drinking.
Yeah, whatever. Just either or.
Have a bar in the back of the car. Party!
Well, I think that I'm waiting for someone to make it look like a really cool autonomous car, because I think that's going to be because everyone's still, like, I mean, if you look at it, everyone still has that traditional sense of what the car is looking like, and everyone still faces forward, and, you know, kind of, you know, where's that modular kind of approach where you don't have to have all these things and change the way it functions. So.
No, it's true. And if you think of the autonomous vehicles that we've seen in movies, if you think of one of the first ones, I guess, would have been The Fifth Element, where Bruce Willis falls into the taxi, and it's a flying taxi being driven by a robot. But of course, it's exactly like a present day taxi, and there's a driver in the front, but it's a robot, so it's autonomous. But the robot's in human-ish form. He turns his head around and talks to Bruce Willis, and Bruce Willis is in the back of what would be a normal taxi. So absolutely no change apart from the fact that it's autonomous. And the other one that we saw, I guess, from popular fiction would be the one from what was a pre-crime movie?
Minority Report.
Minority Report. Thank you. Where Tom Cruise, calls up a vehicle that appears outside his window. He hops in, but again, it's very much car-like. It's an Audi, if I remember correctly, but it's very much sports car-like because it's Audi. Whereas it's not at all like you're talking about. But there's been a couple of concept cars come out of Mercedes, for example, which are a bit like what you're talking about, and they're a bit different. I think we're heading the right direction. Google's self-driving car is interesting because it doesn't have a steering wheel and it doesn't have pedals. So you sit into it, and where the pedals would be and where the steering wheel would be, you've got space to stretch out your legs or put in shopping or whatever it is. And it's the kind of one where you would call it up on your watch or on your phone or whatever and say, I want the car here, and you hop in and take me home when you're home.
I see, looking at it from, a person, like, we have an aging population right now. So we have these baby boomers that are getting older and going to require more care. And, so this actually just becomes an enablement. Like, and one of the big things is getting people to doctor's appointments, getting people from, A to B and those types of things. So, I mean, I see these things as the car pulls up and takes you where you have to be. It's an enabling technology.
In fact, Uber were doing something like that a couple of weeks ago in the US, where what they were doing was they were sending registered nurses out to people with, if I remember correctly, it was flu vaccines. So this was people, and it was to work environments. So you could call them up for $10 and they'd come out and they'd vaccinate a whole lot of people in your workspace for $10. And the idea was, I mean, they did a study on it to see, kind of A/B study, would people do it or not, had it been available. So, would you have got the flu shot were this available or not? And obviously the people who had it available, they were far more likely to go for it. So the increase in the number of people vaccinated in an area that had it was palpable. I forget the exact numbers, but it was.
They have a really interesting platform that they can do a lot with. And that's what I really, I mean, they're experimenting in a lot of different areas and a lot of different things. So, I mean, I was in San Francisco, and we used some cabs, and then we said, well, we might as well try Uber because it's a lot easier. And what a great experience. And you know what, I mean, from the ride sharing to the Uber XL. Like we did a couple of things, and it was just the greatest experience I've ever been.
Yeah. No, I use them. I use them regularly. They're not available here in Seville, but I go to London and the US quite frequently, and I use them there all the time, and I've never had any issues. It's always been pretty great service.
It was just they just had a big protest in Toronto. The cabbies protesting the Uber thing. So I mean, they're just look around. I mean, it's not a bad thing, and a lot of the cabbies I talk to also drive for Uber. So
there's a lot of that going on as well. Yeah. We'll keep going because we're still kind of on this topic, because talking about autonomous vehicles, there was this fascinating story came out this week about this guy Jihot or Geohot, who's a hacker, who was the first guy to break into an iPhone. And by break into, I mean hack into an iPhone and change, at the time it was change the operator. So at the time, if you bought the first iPhone in the US, you were locked into AT&T. And what he did was he hacked into it and got it working on a different provider. So he then went on and pulled off some other cool hacks. But what he's done now is he's taken a Honda Acura, and this is what the inside of the Acura looks like now. He's got a 21-inch Dell monitor there replacing the dashboard. He's ripped out the glove box and put in all kinds of computing bits and pieces. He's got sensors all around it. I mean, this was a standard Acura that he bought. He's got a joystick here to control it. And he built, with $50,000, he's built an almost fully autonomous vehicle. Now, the story is reported in Bloomberg, and the link is in the notes there. And it's a long article. So, and you can see there's a video of it there, and there's more photos as you go down. This is him in his garage, and like I say, it's a long article, but it's a fascinating read. And if you're interested, I would strongly recommend going ahead and having a read of it, because one of the things he did was he took a slightly different approach to building an autonomous vehicle. The way he did it was he used artificial intelligence. He used artificial intelligence software, and he taught the car how to drive by having the car observing him driving first, and then he let the car have a go at driving, and then he would drive again for another bit, and the car learned by watching him. And it was a much shorter development cycle and far cheaper. And if you were to believe him, and this guy's got, if I remember correctly, it talked about him studying for his PhD in artificial intelligence. So I assume he passed and got his PhD in it in Carnegie Mellon. So I mean, the guy has got the smarts, and I mean, it's a different approach to autonomous vehicles, and potentially one that could scale incredibly well.
I love anyone who hacks. I mean, I love hackers. I mean, I think it's such a passionate thing, and he built something pretty cool. I read the article before we came on, and the stuff he's doing is pretty impressive. And I think only, in a little bit I read about I hate going back to Tesla again, but how they do their auto driving, and it's a system of learning something similar, but not quite what this guy's done. He sounds like he's done something really, really neat. So
the Tesla one works off an Israeli chipset, which is entirely rule-based. So it's not AI as such. It's if this then that kind of thing.
Okay, I thought there was I thought as more people drove a certain road, it would build up a better sense of what.
That's slightly different. The way that works is they share GPS information.
Okay.
So the route information is shared, and you've got this learned map globally, which is shared. Yeah, but the actual that's more about GPS and about learning routes.
Yeah, his was the computer was looking at what was happening when he was doing what would make him do certain things. Like, I mean, and then processing that to say that when there's a car there, do this,
Yeah.
and it's impressive. I mean, to that kind of thought pattern is so impressive, and I love it.
It's amazing. It is absolutely. And sticking kind of with AI, for the next story, we saw Stephen Wolfram. He of Wolfram Alpha fame and Wolfram language fame has decided that he wants his Wolfram language, which is a programming language, he wants it to be more widely used. So what he's done, excuse me, is he's made the development tools available as a free cloud service, and he's also published a book to help people, which is available on Amazon or from the Wolfram website at $15 or $17 ballpark. This is an interesting one because Wolfram's a bit of a genius. He's a bit of a legend, really, in the space. But I gotta wonder, is this a bit of a misstep? Because sure, making it available as a free cloud service is pretty cool. But I think if he wants to increase the adoption of it, would it not have been better to make it open source the way Apple have done with Swift, and most of the successful languages are open source at this point?
Well, that's why I love open source stuff. I mean, I've worked in both sides of it, the closed down and open side. I always thought that's kind of that's what I thought he was going to do, but in reading it, it sounds quite a bit more restrictive than that. So
yeah, I think it's a missed opportunity on his part. To be honest,
I would have gone full open. I would have, and because I mean, that's really when you see the that nice upswing of adoption is when a lot of people can get it in their hands. I mean, you don't have to look very far. Adobe, there's a whole bunch of people that kept closed systems and have really changed their approach now and are opening stuff up.
Look at Microsoft.
Yeah.
For example.
There's
opening their whole development suite.
They had to. I mean, that was the only way that they could remain relevant, and it's worked very well for them. There's a resurgence in Microsoft that's pretty interesting to watch right now, especially around the productivity suite area, and we're keeping an eye on that, and it's really interesting. They've turned the corner.
Steve Ballmer would be turning in his grave if he died.
Oh yeah, but he's too busy watching a basketball game or something.
Speaking of open and AI, we've got a nice confluence here because Elon Musk, who we've alluded to with Tesla, and a group of other seriously rich people in the US have come together to form this thing called Open AI, Open Artificial Intelligence, and they're forming it as a non-profit research company. And the goal is, they say, to advance digital intelligence in a way that is likely to benefit humanity as a whole. And we've seen before Elon Musk, warning about the artificial intelligence in the wrong hands and what might go wrong. So they've set up this company as a non-profit research company, and they say they're going to open up all of the research that they do and open up the patents. And the people that got on board are pretty freaking impressive. I mean, the research director is Ilya Sutskever, who's one of the world experts in machine learning. The CTO is Greg Brockman, former CTO of Stripe. The other founding members, it's a who's who, really, it is.
Oh, yeah.
You've got people like Elon Musk, Reid Hoffman, Jesse Livingston, Peter Thiel, AWS, Infosys, and YC Research are donating to fund it. They're putting $1 billion into it, or they're committing that, although they're only going to spend a fraction of it in the first few years. I mean, it sounds massively interesting, and we've talked on this show before about how AI is on the huge upswing in terms of research, and how Microsoft are getting into it, IBM are getting into it, Google are getting into it. Apple are trying to get into it, but Apple are suffering from the fact that they're so secretive, because all of these researchers who are into it, they're in huge demand, and the only way that they get to promote themselves is by publishing research papers. And if you work for Apple, you can never publish a research paper. So having an open AI organization, which will be absolutely pushing you to publish, is got to be massively attractive to the researchers. So, you got to think that an organization like this, which is heavily funded and which is totally open, will be a complete magnet for the best and the brightest in AI.
Well, it's interesting, when you listen to, I'm glad Elon Musk saw Terminator, and I'm glad it scared him. I mean, and I think that's really what he wants us to get to avoid is this, what did we just do moment that, the pace at which we're advancing in this field is unbelievable. And we touch on a little bit in what we do, but there's a tie-in story to that coming out of Canada, is that a lot of the AI research, people who are doing AI in Canada are being bought up and shipped down to the States. So there's a real centralization of that talent down to Silicon Valley, out of Waterloo, where we produce pure math grads and stuff like that. So it's just a side story.
Right. Okay. We're running over, and I'm aware of people's time, so I want to try and get through as many stories as possible reasonably quickly. There was an interesting one about IBM, and it's in the notes there, setting up a big research facility in Munich as well, around Watson, which is it's machine learning, which is kind of a flavor of artificial intelligence, slightly different. And frankly, I'm not qualified enough to comment on the differences between them, so I'm not going to go into that in too much detail, other than to bring it up. But what I saw was also interesting, and on a slightly different note, is how several of the large companies are chasing down blockchain and ditching Bitcoin by creating their own blockchain technology. And again, this is IBM, but it's also Intel, Cisco, the London Stock Exchange Group, big name banks like JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, and State Street. They've all come together to create this alternative to blockchain, and they're doing it not for profit, using the Linux Foundation, so it's going to be completely open source as well. And I mean, blockchain is a technology which is revolutionary. It's only been touched on, I think. Its use has only been touched on slightly so far with things like Bitcoin. But there's so many other areas in which it's going to be used. Having people like IBM, Intel, and Cisco coming up with an alternative could be a little bit scary, except for the fact that they're open sourcing it using Linux, or the Linux Foundation. Right there, when you start to see that kind of a forking of it, it starts to get really interesting, because there's nothing like a bit of competition. And we saw several flavors very early on in Unix, several flavors of Unix coming out, the various Nixes. Seeing this for blockchain can only, I think, be a good thing for the technology.
Yeah, I mean, there's I think that the fact that they're able to connect and have all these transactions, I think that's really what they like about it. The ledgers that it creates around every transaction, and the security that you can create between two people in a transaction. I mean, there's a lot of steps forward for. I mean, I don't fully understand everything that's going on in that space. It's a lot of pure math. Yeah, and there's a lot of those competing flavors that have popped up. So this would just be another one, really.
Indeed, but with some huge backers.
Big, yeah. They're trustworthy. I mean, because that's what happened when Mt. Gox collapsed. I mean, who was really doing it? Who was behind it? I mean, not that some of those names that you mentioned aren't capable of stealing your money. Some of the banks certainly are, but at least you feel a little bit better about them versus just going off into the ether, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. Well, there's two more stories I want to do. And the first is interesting, I think, because it's an IoT story, and we touch on IoT regularly. And this is one where Nuance are a big player in the voice recognition and speech to text and text to speech technologies. They've been around for a long time. If I remember correctly, Nuance were bought by IBM. I could be wrong about that, but I'm reasonably sure they were. But they've come up with a platform for IoT. So now IoT applications will be able to, because it's a platform that anyone can use. IoT applications can be voice enabled using this technology reasonably straightforwardly, if you believe the release from Nuance. Anyway, they've got this Nuance Mix platform that they're putting out there for people, for developers to use to add voice recognition to their IoT applications, which is pretty good because, I mean, we've anyone who has used IoT stuff. I mean, I've got several IoT applications on my phone here for controlling lights and things like that around the house, and if you can have them tie it into something like Siri or something similar like that, or Amazon Echo or something, then suddenly it all starts to become a lot easier to work on. There's still a huge amount of work to be done on IoT applications to make them easier to use. And making them voice enabled would certainly be a big step, I think, in the right direction that way.
Yeah, there's I love the natural text to speech and all that. There's a lot of really neat stuff that you can do once you get the voice, and I think what we're seeing is the new interface is no interface, and that's coming from a software design. That's really where we're heading is that no interface kind of thing. Yeah. Whatever, I don't even know what that looks like yet, but we're certainly getting closer to it with this voice stuff.
Yeah, computer tea, Earl Grey hot.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm so waiting. I would have ordered another coffee a long time ago.
All right, last story, and this one is out of Facebook, and I just bring this up because this has been a criticism of Facebook for such a long time, and the criticism has been that you needed to have a real name, you needed to use your actual name on your Facebook account. And this was an issue for lots of people who, were in situations where this could have gotten them in trouble. So if you think of the Arab Spring and people trying to use Facebook there and trying to, protest against their government legitimately, but having to use their name, it suddenly kind of exposes them. If you think of people in Syria or people in Bahrain, for example, or Saudi Arabia, or any other kind of repressive regime like that, or even in places where things like being gay or lesbian are frowned on, and you want to agitate for rights there, do you really want everyone to know if you're not fully out? Maybe not. So the ability or the requirement to be using your name, your real name on Facebook has been a bit of a drawback for a lot of people. And now Facebook are rolling back on that requirement and saying, okay, look, we now accept that this is not necessarily the case, that you have to use your real name. And as long as you give us good reasons, we'll certainly take it into account. There's no guaranteeing, but at least they are now revisiting that requirement and saying, yeah, maybe you're right. And, give us reasons why you don't want to use your real name, and we'll take it on board.
Well, that's the interesting thing. Like, if this many people, like, the way I look at it, that probably only affects this many people out of this many users. Yeah. So the other ones that want the anonymity are just the jerks that are trolling the local newspaper things. That's so I live in Canada. There's no reason that you, aside from if you had, you didn't, like I said, you didn't want to come out, blah, 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 those types of things. But there's no political persecution going on here. You don't have to. But these are the people that are going on and just being idiots on the local newspaper when there's people that really need it for life or death situations. And I find it's kind of that that irony, or not, that's not irony, but it's
a fair point. And it's one that a lot of people don't consider, I guess, that when you have got, as I say, those kind of situations, it is a requirement. And the trolls and the idiots make it harder for that to be rolled out. It's really frustrating, but at least now Facebook are taking that on board, and they're going to put procedures in place to review every case and decide yay or nay, which is good.
Sounds like a very reasonable thing to do from a big company.
Indeed, indeed. Okay, that's all the stories for this week. Thanks everyone for your time and your attention, and we shall be back. No, we won't. Next week is the 20-something. It is the middle of Christmas. We'll be back in January. So have a great Christmas holidays, everyone, and we'll see you back in January. Thanks for your time and attention, and have a good one.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me on. That was great. And to your guests, I hope I didn't make you run too late. So thanks again, and have a great Christmas.